Courtroom 4B in the Cook County Courthouse was packed that Thursday morning. Her family on one side, my sister and a few friends on the other. Everyone waiting to watch what they thought would be my public execution. My wife Simone sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her lawyer beside her in a suit that screamed, "I win cases for a living." They were whispering to each other, smiling, confident. She kept glancing back at me, sitting alone at the defendant's table with no attorney, no briefcase, nothing but a yellow legal pad and a pen that was almost out of ink. She actually laughed. Right there in that courtroom, loud enough for the bailiff to look over. Her lawyer didn't stop her. He just smirked and straightened his tie like he'd already won. But then the doors at the back opened, and when that man walked in, 6'3", charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it looked painted on, Italian leather briefcase that probably cost more than her lawyer's car, the entire energy in that room shifted. People sat up straighter. Lawyers recognized him and started whispering. Even the judge, who hadn't arrived yet, would have felt the change if she'd been there. Simone's face went from smug satisfaction to confusion to recognition to pure terror in about 5 seconds. Her lawyer's smirk vanished. He leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear, and I watched all the color drain from her cheeks. Because walking toward my table, moving like he owned every inch of that courtroom, was attorney Khalil Darian Richardson, the man who'd never lost a divorce case in 23 years. The man whose billboards were all over Chicago. The man whose hourly rate was $850 and whose retainer started at $50,000. The man my wife thought I could never afford. He set that briefcase down on my table, extended his hand to me, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mr. Webb, I've reviewed your case. Let's get you everything you deserve." The look on Simone's face in that moment, that was worth every single thing I'd been through to get there. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had someone count you out and then watch their world crumble when you prove them wrong, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because I promise you, this story is going to take you places you're not expecting. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, because I need to know there are people out there who understand what it feels like when the person who vowed to love you forever becomes the person trying to destroy you. My name is Isaiah Garrett Webb. When this story begins, I was 43 years old, living on the south side of Chicago in a house I'd spent 17 years turning into a home. I thought I understood betrayal. I thought I knew what it meant to fight for something. I thought I knew who my wife was. I was wrong about all of it. This is the story of how I lost everything and won it all back in the same breath. This is the story of how my wife tried to bury me and ended up digging her own grave instead. And it starts on a rainy October evening in 2006 in a place I never should have been. I met Simone Renee Patterson at my lowest point, which should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. It was October 2006, and I was 31 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room at Northwestern Memorial at 2 in the morning. My sister Keisha had been in a car accident. Some drunk driver ran a red light on Lakeshore Drive and T-boned her Honda Civic. She was in surgery, and I was sitting in a plastic chair that made my back ache, wearing work clothes covered in sawdust because I'd come straight from a job site in Pilsen where I'd been installing custom cabinets until midnight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking about how Keisha was all I had left. Our parents had died 6 years earlier, within 8 months of each other. Dad from a heart attack, Mama from what the doctors called a stroke, but what I knew was really a broken heart. Keisha and I had raised her son Devin together, splitting custody and responsibilities, building a family out of the wreckage of our grief. If I lost her, I lost everything. A woman in purple scrubs sat down 2 chairs away from me around 2:30 a.m. I didn't pay much attention at first. Hospitals are full of tired people at odd hours. But then she spoke. "You've been sitting in the same position for 40 minutes. Your back is going to hate you tomorrow." Her voice was soft but confident, the kind of voice that made you listen even when you didn't want to. I looked over and saw her clearly for the first time. She was maybe 28, brown skin that seemed to glow even under those harsh fluorescent lights, natural hair pulled back in a low bun, and eyes that looked like they understood suffering. Not the kind of understanding you get from reading about it, the kind you get from living through it. My sister's in surgery, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Car accident. They've been working on her for 3 hours now. I know, she said, and that surprised me. I'm one of the surgical nurses. I was in there. I just came out to get some air. She paused, seemed to be weighing whether to tell me something. She's strong. She's fighting. Whatever happens, she's fighting. The way she said it made me believe her, made me feel like maybe everything wasn't falling apart. We sat there in that waiting room for another hour, not saying much, just existing in the same space. She brought me coffee from the nurse's station. I told her about Keisha, about Devin, about how I was trying to hold everything together with my construction business, while also being a father figure to a 9-year-old boy who'd already lost too much. She told me her name, Simone, and said she'd been a nurse for 6 years, that she'd moved to Chicago from Memphis after her grandmother died, and left her nothing but a Bible and a warning to never trust men who made promises they couldn't keep. When the surgeon finally came out at 4:47 a.m. and told me Keisha would make it, that she'd need months of recovery, but she'd survive, I broke down right there in that waiting room, just put my face in my hands and cried like I hadn't cried since Mama's funeral. And Simone, this woman I'd known for less than 3 hours, put her hand on my shoulder and let me fall apart without judgment, without trying to fix me. Just let me be broken for a minute. Before she left for her shift change that morning, Simone wrote her number on a napkin from the cafeteria and handed it to me. Call me when things settle down, she said. When your sister's better and you're not running on adrenaline and fear. Call me and tell me how it all turned out. I kept that napkin in my wallet for 2 weeks before I called. Kept pulling it out and looking at it, wondering if she really wanted me to reach out or if she'd just been being kind in a moment when I was vulnerable. But something about her had stayed with me. The way she'd sat with my pain instead of running from it. The way she'd seen me at my worst and hadn't looked away. When I finally called, she answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting. We talked for 2 hours. Then 3 days later, we met for coffee at a diner in Hyde Park. Then, dinner the following week at a soul food restaurant in Bronzeville, where the catfish was so good we ordered seconds. She told me about growing up in Memphis, about her grandmother who'd raised her after her parents abandoned her to chase drugs and dreams, about nursing school and bad relationships and starting over in Chicago with nothing but hope and determination. I told her about building my construction company from the ground up, about raising Devin with Keisha, about the fear that I'd never be successful enough or stable enough to have a real family of my own. You already have a real family, Simone said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. You've got your sister. You've got Devin. You've got people who depend on you and love you. That's more than most people ever get. The way she looked at me when she said it made me feel seen in a way I'd never felt before. Like I was enough exactly as I was. Like I didn't need to be more successful or more together or more anything. I was just enough. We dated for 9 months before I proposed. I saved up for 4 months to buy her a ring. Nothing extravagant, just a simple princess-cut diamond on a white gold band that caught the light when she moved her hand. I proposed on Navy Pier on a July evening in 2007, with the sunset painting the sky orange and pink and the Ferris wheel turning slow circles behind us. I got down on one knee right there on the pier while tourists and locals walked past us, and I asked her to build a life with me. She said yes before I even finished the question. Cried so hard she couldn't breathe. Told me she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to choose her the way I was choosing her. We got married 3 months later in October 2007 at a small church in Bronzeville. Keisha was my best man because she'd been through everything with me and deserved to stand beside me on the best day of my life. Simone's cousin Valencia came up from Memphis to be her maid of honor. We didn't have money for anything fancy, so we had the reception in the church fellowship hall with catering from Harold's Chicken Shack and a DJ My friend Darnell knew who owed me a favor from when I'd renovated his kitchen for half price. We danced until the janitor told us we had to leave. Simone's head on my chest, my arms around her waist, both of us swaying to Luther Vandross, while everyone else packed up folding chairs and swept confetti off the floor. I'm going to love you until I stop breathing. She whispered against my neck. I promise you that. I promise. I believed every word. God help me, I believed her with everything I had. The first 3 years of our marriage felt like proof that good things could happen to people who'd survived bad things. We moved into a small house in Chatham that needed work but had character. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with cabinets that didn't close right, and countertops from 1987. But it was ours. I spent every weekend fixing it up while Simone worked double shifts at the hospital. New flooring in the kitchen. I ripped up that old linoleum myself and installed hardwood I got at a discount from a supplier who appreciated my business. Fresh paint in every room. Simone chose the colors, soft greens and warm grays that made the house feel like a sanctuary. A small deck in the backyard where we'd sit on Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, not talking, just being together in comfortable silence. My construction business grew slowly but steadily. I started with just me and 2 guys I'd worked with at other companies. Raymond, who could frame a house faster than anyone I'd ever seen, and Carlos, who did finish work so precise it looked like art. We took small jobs at first, kitchen renovations, bathroom remodels, deck additions, but we built a reputation for showing up on time, staying on budget, and doing work that lasted. Word spread. By 2009, I had 5 full-time employees and was bidding on commercial projects. Small stuff, retail build-outs, office renovations, but enough to keep us busy and the money flowing. Simone worked the day shift at Northwestern and came home exhausted most nights. She'd tell me stories about the patients she'd saved and the ones she couldn't, about the families she'd comforted, and the doctors who treated nurses like they were invisible. She talked about wanting to make a difference beyond just one patient at a time, about maybe starting a nonprofit someday that would bring healthcare to underserved neighborhoods. I encouraged her, told her that when the business was more stable, when we had more cushion in our savings, we'd make it happen. She'd smile at me with this grateful look in her eyes and say, I knew you'd understand. I knew I married the right man. Devin spent weekends with us. He was 12 by then, all gangly limbs and attitude. But he loved Simone. She'd help him with homework I couldn't figure out, algebra and science that might as well have been written in code. She'd cook his favorite foods and ask about his friends and treat him like he was hers, even though she hadn't given birth to him. Watching them together, watching her braid his hair or laugh at his jokes or teach him how to dance, I'd think about how lucky I was, about how I'd found someone who didn't just love me, but loved my family too. We tried for kids of our own. Simone wanted 3, said she'd been lonely growing up and wanted our children to have siblings, to have the kind of family she'd never experienced. I wanted whatever she wanted. We tried for 18 months with no luck. Simone started getting anxious, started talking about fertility doctors and treatments and all these medical options that sounded expensive and complicated. But every time I suggested we just be patient, that it would happen when it was meant to happen, she'd get quiet, distant, like I'd said something wrong even though I was trying to be supportive. Looking back now, I wonder if that's when things started changing, when the woman I married started becoming someone else. But I didn't see it then, couldn't see it. I was too busy working, too busy building, too busy believing that love and effort were enough to overcome anything. By 2012, my company had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I started. We'd landed a major contract to renovate a historic theater in Bronzeville, a $3.2 million project that would take 9 months and require me to hire 15 additional workers. It was the kind of job that could make or break a small company like mine. If we did it right, we'd be set for years. If we messed it up, we'd be done. I worked 100-hour weeks during that project, slept 4 hours a night if I was lucky. I'd leave the house at 5 a.m. and get home at midnight, covered in dust and sweat, so exhausted I could barely shower before collapsing into bed. Simone said she understood. said she was proud of me, said the sacrifice would be worth it when we were finally secure. The theater project finished 2 weeks early and $200,000 under budget. My reputation exploded overnight. Suddenly, I was getting calls from developers, from the city, from businesses that wanted quality work and were willing to pay for it. Within a year, I had 25 full-time employees and annual revenue approaching $6 million. We paid off the house, bought new cars, a F-150 for me because I needed a work truck, and a Lexus SUV for Simone because she'd been driving the same beat-up Honda for 8 years and deserved something nice. Started taking real vacations instead of just weekend trips to visit Keisha. In 2014, Simone quit her job at the hospital, said she was ready to start that nonprofit she'd been talking about for years, that she wanted to focus on bringing healthcare access to neighborhoods on the South Side that had been abandoned by the medical system. I supported her completely, set her up with $75,000 in seed money to get started, helped her file the paperwork, build a website, create a business plan. She rented a small office in Inglewood and hired 2 part-time staff members. The nonprofit was called Hope Health Collective, and watching her talk about it, seeing the passion in her eyes when she described the work they do, I fell in love with her all over again. Everything looked perfect from the outside. The successful contractor and his wife who was changing the world, the nice house, the nice cars, the smiles in every photo we posted on Facebook. People at church would tell me how blessed we were, how we were relationship goals, how they wished they had what Simone and I had built together. But here's the thing about perfect pictures. They're just moments frozen in time. They don't show what happens 5 minutes after the photo is taken. They don't show the cracks forming underneath. They don't show the slow rot that eats away at foundations until everything collapses. And by the time I saw the cracks in my marriage, by the time I realized that the woman I'd married had become someone I didn't recognize, it was too late. The collapse had already begun. I just didn't know it yet. The first time I noticed something was off with Simone, it was so small I almost missed it. It was a Friday evening in March 2015, and I'd come home early for once, around 6 p.m. instead of my usual 10 or 11. I was excited because Simone had been texting me all day about making a special dinner, about having a night just the two of us, about reconnecting after months of me being consumed by work. I walked through the door expecting to smell food cooking and hear music playing, the usual setup for when she was in a good mood. Instead, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands, staring at the screen with this expression on her face I'd never seen before. Not quite a smile, but something close, something secretive. "Hey, baby," I said from the doorway. "I'm home early like you asked." She jumped, actually jumped like I'd caught her doing something wrong. Her phone went dark immediately. She'd pressed the power button so fast I almost didn't see her do it. And she stood up with this bright, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Isaiah, I didn't hear you come in. How was work?" The way she said it was too cheerful, too performed, like she was reading lines from a script instead of just talking to her husband. I walked over to kiss her and caught the faintest smell of cologne on her clothes. Not my cologne. Something expensive and woody that I didn't recognize. When I pulled back and looked at her, really looked at her, I noticed she changed her hair. It was styled differently, swept to one side in a way she never wore it when she was just at home. And was that makeup? Full makeup at 6 p.m. on a Friday when she'd supposedly been home all day working on nonprofit stuff? "Did you go somewhere today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "You look really nice." "Oh, this?" She touched her hair self-consciously. "I had a donor meeting earlier. One of those wealthy guys from the North Side who might fund our clinic expansion. Had to look professional, you know? It made sense. It should have made sense. So why did something in my gut twist when she said it? Why did I have this feeling that she was lying to me even though I had no proof, no reason to doubt her? I pushed the feeling down, told myself I was being paranoid, told myself that this was what happened when you worked too much and didn't spend enough time with your wife. You started imagining problems that didn't exist. We went through the motions of a romantic evening. She'd ordered takeout from our favorite Italian place instead of cooking like she'd said, but she played it off like she'd been too busy to prepare something. We ate by candlelight, drank wine. She asked about work, and I told her about the new hospital renovation we'd just been awarded, a $4.5 million contract that would keep us busy for the next year. She seemed happy for me, said all the right things, touched my hand across the table at the right moments, but something was missing, some warmth or authenticity or connection that used to be there. It felt like she was going through the motions of being my wife without actually being present. Like her body was at the table, but her mind was somewhere else, with someone else. But I didn't say anything, didn't want to ruin the evening by accusing her of something I couldn't prove. So I smiled and drank my wine and pretended everything was fine, even as that feeling in my gut grew stronger and colder. Over the next few months, I started noticing other small things that didn't quite add up. Simone was on her phone constantly, and I don't mean casually checking messages or scrolling through social media. I mean attached to it like it was a lifeline. She'd be in the middle of a conversation with me, and her phone would buzz, and her attention would immediately shift. She'd pick it up, read whatever message had come through, and I'd watch her face change. Sometimes she'd smile that same secretive smile I'd seen that night in the bedroom. Sometimes she'd frown and type back furiously. Sometimes she'd excuse herself and take the phone into another room to handle nonprofit business that apparently couldn't wait even 10 minutes. The password on her phone changed. We'd always known each other's passwords. It was just one of those things we'd never thought to hide. But sometime in April, she changed hers. I only found out because I'd gone to use her phone to call mine when I'd misplaced it, and when I tried the old code, it didn't work. "Oh yeah, I changed it last week," she said when I asked. We had a security training at the nonprofit about protecting donor information. They recommended we all update our passwords regularly. Again, it made sense. Again, my gut said she was lying. She started working late, really late. The nonprofit office would supposedly keep her there until 9 or 10 p.m. some nights. Grant applications, she'd explain, fundraising calls with people in different time zones, strategy sessions with the board. I wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that she was just passionate about her work. But when I'd call the office number at 9:30 p.m. to check if she needed me to pick up dinner for her, it would ring and ring with no answer. When I'd mention this, she'd say she must have been in the back office where she couldn't hear the phone, or she'd stepped out to grab coffee, or the ringer was turned down. Always an explanation, always reasonable, always just plausible enough that questioning it made me feel crazy. Her appearance changed too, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. She started wearing more makeup, doing her hair more carefully, buying new clothes, expensive clothes that seemed too fancy for running a small nonprofit on the South Side, designer jeans, silk blouses, shoes that cost $300. When I asked where she was getting money for all this, she said donors had been taking her to nice events and she needed to look the part. Said image mattered when you were asking wealthy people for money. Said I should be happy she was taking the work seriously. But the biggest change was in how she looked at me. Or more accurately, how she stopped looking at me. There used to be this warmth in her eyes when I walked into a room. This light that said she was happy I was there. That light had gone out. Now when she looked at me, if she looked at me at all, her expression was neutral, distant. Like I was a roommate she tolerated instead of a husband she loved. We hadn't had sex in months. Every time I tried to initiate, she had an excuse. She was tired. She had an early meeting. She wasn't feeling well. Her period was coming. One excuse after another until I stopped trying because the rejection hurt worse than the loneliness. In July, my sister Keisha came over for Sunday dinner and pulled me aside while Simone was in the kitchen. "We need to talk about your wife," Keisha said in a low voice, her eyes serious in a way that made my stomach drop. We were standing in my backyard near the deck I'd built years ago, far enough from the house that Simone wouldn't hear us. Keisha had Devin with her. He was 16 now, more interested in his phone than adult conversations, and he was inside watching TV. The July heat was oppressive, the kind of sticky Chicago summer heat that made you sweat just from standing still. I could hear the neighbors' kids playing in their pool, their laughter floating over the fence. Normal sounds, normal life. But something about the way Keisha was looking at me said nothing was normal anymore. What about her? I asked, even though I knew, had known for months but hadn't wanted to admit it. Isaiah, when's the last time you really paid attention to her? When's the last time you asked yourself if she's acting like a woman who's happily married? Keisha's voice was gentle but firm, the tone she used when she was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. I've been watching her today, the way she keeps checking her phone, the way she smiles at messages and then hides the screen, the way she barely looks at you. That's not how a wife acts when her husband is in the room. That's how a woman acts when she's got someone else on her mind. I wanted to defend Simone, wanted to tell Keisha she was wrong, that she was reading too much into nothing, that Simone was just stressed about the nonprofit and I was stressed about work, and that's all it was. But the words died in my throat because deep down I knew Keisha was right. I'd known it for months. I'd just been too scared to face it. What am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Accuse her? Demand to see her phone? Follow her around like some jealous husband? You're supposed to talk to her? Keisha said, putting her hand on my arm. You're supposed to sit her down and tell her you see what's happening, that you're not stupid, that you deserve the truth, because right now, baby brother, she's playing you, and you're letting her. She was right. I knew she was right. But I didn't want to have that conversation, didn't want to hear Simone confirm what I already suspected, didn't want to face the reality that my marriage was falling apart. So I told Keisha I'd think about it. Told her I'd talk to Simone when the time was right. Told her not to worry because I had everything under control. I didn't have anything under control. I was drowning and pretending to swim. That night, after Keisha left, I tried to talk to Simone. We were in the living room. She was on the couch with her laptop, supposedly working on a grant application. I was in my chair by the window, trying to read a book, but really just watching her. Watching the way her face lit up every time her phone buzzed. Watching the way she'd glance at it, smile, then force her expression back to neutral before looking up to make sure I hadn't noticed. I'd noticed. I'd noticed everything. Simone, I said, setting my book down. Can we talk? She looked up from her laptop, and for just a second I saw something flash across her face. Annoyance? Guilt? Whatever it was, it disappeared fast, replaced by that pleasant mask she'd been wearing around me for months. Of course, baby. What's up? Are we okay? The question came out heavier than I'd intended. More vulnerable. I mean, really okay? Because lately it feels like we're just existing next to each other, like we're roommates instead of married people. She closed her laptop slowly, buying time to think of an answer. We're fine, Isaiah. We're just busy. You're working all the time. I'm building the nonprofit. That's what happens when you're trying to build something meaningful. Sometimes the relationship takes a back seat for a while. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It feels wrong, I said. It feels like you're somewhere else, even when you're sitting right here. Like I'm losing you, and I don't know how to get you back. For a moment, just a moment, I saw real emotion in her eyes. Something that looked like sadness or regret, or maybe even guilt. But then she blinked, and it was gone. You're not losing me, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. You're just stressed. We both are, but we're solid. We're always going to be solid. She was lying. We both knew she was lying. But I didn't push, didn't demand the truth. Just nodded and picked up my book and pretended to read while she went back to her laptop. And in that moment, in that failure to fight for what we had, I sealed our fate. Because if I'd pushed then, if I'd demanded honesty then, maybe things would have turned out different. Maybe she would have confessed. Maybe we could have fixed it. But I didn't push. And she didn't confess. And the crack between us widened into a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. August 2015 was when Simone stopped pretending to care about hiding it. She'd come home late on a Tuesday night, close to midnight, and I was still awake in bed, unable to sleep because the anxiety had become my constant companion. I heard her car pull into the driveway, heard the front door open and close, heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. When she walked into the bedroom, she didn't look guilty or apologetic or even tired. She looked energized. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were bright. She had that just-been-kissed look that any husband with half a brain could recognize. She smelled like cologne again, that same expensive, woody scent that definitely wasn't mine. "Where were you?" I asked from the bed, my voice flat. "Donor dinner," she said, not meeting my eyes as she kicked off her heels and started undressing. It ran late. You know how these things go. I didn't know how these things went because she'd never invited me to a single one of these supposed donor dinners, never mentioned names of donors or details about the meetings, just vague references to important people who might write checks. I watched her change into pajamas, watched her go through her nighttime routine like this was completely normal, and I made a decision. Tomorrow I was going to follow her. Tomorrow I was going to see for myself where she was really going and who she was really with. Tomorrow I was done being the trusting husband who got played for a fool. The next evening, I told her I had a late meeting with a contractor in the western suburbs and wouldn't be home until 10 p.m. She barely reacted, just said okay without looking up from her phone, and went back to texting whoever had her attention these days. I left the house at 6:30 like I always did, drove my truck to the end of our block, then circled back and parked 3 houses down with a clear view of our driveway. I felt ridiculous. Felt like one of those suspicious husbands in bad movies. But I needed to know. Needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts weren't lying to me. At 7:15, Simone came out of the house. She'd changed clothes, was wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, fitted and short, the kind of dress you wear when you want someone to notice you. Her hair was down, falling in waves over her shoulders. She'd done her makeup carefully, the way she used to do it when we first started dating, and she wanted to impress me. She got into her Lexus and backed out of the driveway, and I started my truck and followed her. She didn't go to the nonprofit office in Inglewood, didn't go to any restaurant on the south side. She drove north, all the way up Lake Shore Drive into downtown, and pulled into the parking garage of the Peninsula Hotel on Michigan Avenue, one of the most expensive hotels in Chicago, the kind of place where rooms started at $500 a night and went up from there. I parked across the street and watched through my rearview mirror as she got out of her car and walked into the lobby like she'd been there 100 times before. Confident, familiar, at home. I sat in my truck for 45 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to storm into that hotel, demand to know which room she was in, confront her and whoever she was meeting. But another part of me, the part that was already planning ahead, already thinking like someone preparing for war, that part knew I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof, evidence, the kind of evidence that would hold up when this whole thing fell apart. So I waited, and at 9:30, she came back out. But she wasn't alone. There was a man with her. White guy, maybe 45 or 50, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He had his hand on the small of her back as they walked to the parking garage, said something that made her laugh, leaned in and kissed her cheek before she got in her car. I got a photo of that kiss, pulled out my phone and took 3 photos in quick succession, making sure to get a clear shot of both their faces. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. The rage was building in my chest like pressure in a boiler, threatening to explode. But I held it in, held it down, because this wasn't the time for rage. This was the time for strategy. I didn't follow her home. Instead, I drove to my sister's house in Bronzeville and sat in her kitchen at 10 p.m. while she made tea and listened to me explain what I just witnessed. "I need you to tell me I'm not crazy," I said, showing her the photos on my phone. "I need you to tell me I saw what I think I saw." Keisha looked at the photos, her face hardening with every swipe. When she handed the phone back to me, her eyes were full of fury. "That's not a business meeting. That's not a donor dinner. That's your wife cheating on you with some man who looks like he owns half of downtown Chicago." She stood up from the kitchen table and started pacing, the way she always did when she was angry. How long has this been going on? How long have you known? I've suspected for months, but this is the first time I've seen it with my own eyes. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? Confront her and demand a divorce? Try to work it out? Every option felt impossible. Every option felt like it would destroy me. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to pack her stuff and throw her out tonight. But part of me, I trailed off, not wanting to admit the truth out loud. Part of you still loves her, Keisha said quietly, sitting back down and taking my hand. Part of you wants to believe there's an explanation. Part of you wants to fix it. She paused, squeezing my hand. But baby brother, you can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. And that woman doesn't want to be fixed. She wants to have her cake and eat it too. She wants your house and your money and your name, and she wants her affair with Mr. Silver Hair on the side. So what do? You get a lawyer. You document everything. You protect yourself and your business before she realizes you know. Because the second she figures out you're onto her, she's going to start moving money and hiding assets and doing everything she can to take you for everything you're worth. Keisha was right. I knew she was right. But sitting there in her kitchen, looking at photos of my wife kissing another man, all I felt was empty, hollow. Like someone had reached inside my chest and pulled out everything that mattered. I went home around midnight. Simone was already in bed, in the guest room where she'd been sleeping for the past month, under the excuse that I snored too loud and she needed better rest. I stood in the doorway and watched her sleep for a long moment, trying to reconcile the woman I'd married with the woman I'd seen tonight. Trying to understand how someone could share your life, share your bed, share your dreams, and then betray you so completely. I didn't have an answer. I'm not sure there was one. Over the next 2 months, I played the role of the oblivious husband while I prepared for war. I hired a private investigator named Vincent Cho, a former cop who specialized in infidelity cases. Paid him $5,000 up front to follow Simone and document everything. He came back with a report that made me physically sick. She'd been seeing the man from the Peninsula Hotel. His name was Richard Haverford III, venture capitalist, worth approximately $47 million, divorced twice with 3 kids he barely saw, for at least 8 months. They met at the Peninsula once or twice a week. Sometimes they went to restaurants in neighborhoods where no one would recognize her. Sometimes they just drove around in his Mercedes, parked in secluded spots, did things I didn't want to imagine. Vincent had photos, videos, timestamps, evidence that would hold up in any court in America. I opened a separate bank account that Simone didn't know about and started moving money there. Not a lot at once. I didn't want to raise red flags, but enough that I'd have resources when this blew up. I met with 3 different divorce attorneys, paid consultation fees in cash, and learned everything I could about Illinois divorce law. What I learned terrified me. Illinois was an equitable distribution state, which meant marital assets got divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. And guess what counted as a marital asset? My business. The company I'd built from nothing. The blood and sweat and sleepless nights I'd poured into creating something successful. Simone could claim she'd supported me while I built it, that she'd sacrificed her career for mine, that she deserved compensation. And depending on the judge, she might get it. The lawyers I consulted all said the same thing. I needed a better attorney than I could afford. I needed someone who could fight the kind of legal team that Richard Haverford III's money could buy. Because make no mistake, that's who would be funding Simone's divorce. The man who was sleeping with my wife would be paying to take everything from me. One lawyer mentioned a name, Khalil Richardson, said he was the best divorce attorney in Chicago, maybe the best in Illinois. Said his retainer was $50,000 and his hourly rate was $850. But if you wanted to win, he was worth every penny. I laughed, literally laughed, right there in that lawyer's office. Where was I supposed to get $50,000 for a retainer when I was trying to protect my business and prepare for a divorce and keep up appearances so Simone wouldn't suspect anything? But that name stuck in my head, Khalil Richardson. The lawyer who never lost. The lawyer who could save me if I could just figure out how to afford him. I filed that information away, filed it in the part of my brain that was constantly strategizing, constantly trying to find angles and solutions. I didn't know how yet, but somehow, some way, I was going to get Khalil Richardson in my corner. Because if Simone thought she was going to destroy me and walk away with half of everything I'd built, she had another thing coming. I just needed to survive long enough to fight back. In October, exactly 8 years after we'd gotten married, Simone asked me for a divorce. She didn't wait for a special moment or try to soften the blow. Just walked into the living room on a Wednesday evening while I was reviewing construction plans for a school renovation and said, "I want a divorce. I think we should separate as soon as possible." I looked up from my papers and saw her standing there with her arms crossed. Her face set an expression of cold determination. She wasn't sad, wasn't apologetic, wasn't even pretending to be conflicted. She looked like she'd been planning this for months and was finally ready to execute the plan. "Why?" I asked, even though I knew why. Even though I'd seen the photos and read the investigators' reports and knew exactly what she'd been doing behind my back. But I wanted to hear her say it, wanted to see if she'd at least have the decency to be honest. "I'm not happy," she said simply. "Haven't been happy for a long time. I think we got married too fast, too young. We wanted different things. Now we're just going through the motions, and I don't want to live like this anymore." Not one word about Richard, not one admission of guilt. She was rewriting history right there in front of me, making this about us growing apart instead of her betrayal, making this my fault for working too much, for not paying enough attention, for not being enough. And the scary part? I could see her believing it. Could see that she told herself this story so many times that she convinced herself it was true. "There's someone else, isn't there?" I said, my voice steady despite the rage building behind my ribs. She hesitated, just for a second. Then, "That's not what this is about." "So there is someone. Isaiah, don't make this uglier than it needs to be. We can do this civilly. We can divide everything fairly and both move on with our lives. Or we can fight about it and make lawyers rich. Your choice." My choice. She was giving me a choice between surrendering everything I'd worked for or fighting a battle I probably couldn't win. Some choice. "I'm not giving you half my business," I said. "That's not negotiable." She smiled then. Actually smiled. "We'll see what the judge says about that. You might want to get yourself a lawyer, Isaiah. You're going to need one." The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later, and they were even worse than I'd imagined. Simone was asking for the house, 50% ownership of my company or equivalent value in cash, half of all our savings and investments, alimony of $7,500 per month for 10 years. She was claiming she'd sacrificed her nursing career to support my business growth, that she'd been the emotional backbone of our marriage while I focused on making money, that she deserved compensation for all her unpaid labor. Every line of that petition made my blood pressure spike. Every demand felt like a knife in my back. I met with lawyers again, got the same answers I'd gotten before. Without serious money for legal representation, I was going to lose most of what she was asking for. Illinois courts favored length of marriage. We'd been married 8 years. That was long enough for her to claim she'd contributed to my success. Long enough for a judge to rule that yes, she deserved a significant portion of everything. My business was worth approximately $8 million based on assets and annual revenue. If she got 50%, that was $4 million. I didn't have $4 million in liquid assets to pay her out. I'd have to sell the company or take on massive debt. Either way, I'd lose what I'd spent 15 years building. The house was worth $475,000. If she got that, I'd be starting over with nothing. The savings account had $180,000. Half of that was $90,000. Add in the alimony, $7,500 a month for 120 months, that was another $900,000. Do the math. She was asking me for approximately $5.5 million total. I didn't have it. Even if I liquidated everything, I'd still come up short. And that's what she was counting on. She wanted me broken, wanted me destroyed. Whether that was her idea or Richard Haverford's didn't really matter anymore. The result was the same. In November, Simone moved out, took her clothes and personal items, and moved into a luxury apartment in River North that I knew she couldn't afford on her nonprofit salary. Richard was paying for it. Had to be. The apartment was in one of those new high-rises with a doorman and a gym, and probably cost $4,000 a month. But I couldn't prove it, couldn't prove he was supporting her. She'd been careful to keep his name out of everything official. The divorce papers made no mention of infidelity or affairs, just irreconcilable differences and irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Clean, vague, impossible to dispute. I walked through my empty house on the first night she was gone and felt nothing, no relief, no sadness, just numbness. The house that had felt so full 8 years ago, the house we'd fixed up together and filled with plans and dreams, now felt like a museum. A monument to something that had died without me noticing. I slept in our bed, my bed now, and stared at the ceiling until dawn, trying to figure out how I'd gotten here, how I'd missed so many signs, how I'd let her make a fool of me for 8 months while I worked and saved and built, thinking I was building our future, that not realizing she'd already decided I didn't have a place in hers. My sister called every day during this time, checking on me, making sure I was eating and sleeping and not doing anything stupid. "You're going to survive this," she kept telling me. "You're going to come out the other side stronger." I wanted to believe her. But sitting in that empty house, facing legal bills I couldn't pay and divorce terms I couldn't meet, I didn't see how. I saw my company being sold off piece by piece, saw myself back where I'd started at 31, broke and starting over, except now I'd be 44 with a destroyed credit score and a failed marriage on my record. I saw Simone with Richard, spending my money, living in luxury while I struggled to rebuild. And the rage that I'd been keeping locked down for months finally broke free. Not explosive rage, not the kind that makes you do something you regret, but cold, calculated fury, the kind that makes you focus, the kind that makes you dangerous. She wanted to destroy me? Fine. She thought she'd already won? Fine. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way to turn this around. I was going to find a way to make her regret ever underestimating me. I just needed a miracle. And miracles, I was about to learn, sometimes come from the most unexpected places. The miracle walked into my life on a freezing December morning in the form of my oldest friend, Bryant Rashad Cole. Bryant and I went back to high school, back to when we were both broke kids from the South Side trying to figure out how to survive. We'd stayed in touch over the years, but our lives had gone in very different directions. While I'd built a construction company, Bryant had gone to Yale Law School on a full scholarship, worked at a corporate firm for 5 years, then quit to start his own practice, focusing on civil rights and employment discrimination cases. He made decent money, but nothing like the corporate lawyers. Bryant had principles, would rather win cases that mattered than get rich defending people he didn't believe in. He showed up at my house at 7 a.m. on a Thursday without calling first, let himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago, and found me in the kitchen staring at a cup of cold coffee. "You look terrible," were his first words. Not hello, not how are you, just brutal honesty. That's how Bryant was. He'd never learned how to sugarcoat anything. "Divorce will do that to you," I said, gesturing at the chair across from me. "What brings you to my corner of the world?" "Keisha called me, said you're getting destroyed in court and you're too proud to ask for help." He sat down and pushed a folder across the table toward me. "She also told me about the investigator's report, about your wife's affair, about how they're playing you." I opened the folder and saw copies of all the evidence I'd collected. Photos of Simone and Richard, the PI's reports, bank statements showing her unexplained spending. Bryant had done his homework. "Keisha had no right to involve you," I said, but there was no heat in it. I was too tired to be proud anymore. "She had every right. That's what family does." Bryant leaned forward, his voice intense. "Isaiah, listen to me. You're letting them win because you think you can't afford to fight, but you're missing something important. You have evidence of adultery. You have proof she was planning this divorce while bleeding your resources. You have documentation of her affair with a man who's now funding her legal team. That's not just infidelity. That's fraud. That's her using marital assets to facilitate an affair and then trying to claim she deserves half of everything. Illinois is a no-fault state. The affair doesn't matter for the divorce. It matters for asset distribution. It matters for alimony. It matters when you can prove to a judge that she was essentially stealing from you to fund her betrayal. A good lawyer can use this. The right lawyer can destroy her case. He paused. But you need the right lawyer. I know. Khalil Richardson. Everyone keeps telling me I need Khalil Richardson. But I can't afford his $50,000 retainer, Bryant. I'm protecting my liquid assets for the business. I'm trying to make sure I don't lose everything. I can't drop 50 grand on a lawyer. Bryant smiled. It was a strange smile, something between sympathy and triumph. What if I told you that you can afford him? What if I told you that Khalil Richardson owes me a favor so big that when I call it in, he'll take your case for free? I stared at Bryant like he just told me he could fly. That's not funny, I said. Don't play with me right now, man. I can't handle jokes. I'm not joking. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and showed me a text conversation with someone saved as K. Richardson. The messages were recent, from earlier that morning. Bryant had already talked to him, already explained my situation, already called in whatever favor he was owed. Khalil defended me pro bono 5 years ago when I sued my old firm for racial discrimination. Said I reminded him of his younger brother who died. Said if I ever needed anything at all, he'd make it happen. Well, I'm calling it in now, for you. My throat went tight. My eyes burned. I hadn't cried through any of this. Not when I saw the photos, not when she asked for divorce, not when I read her impossible demands. But sitting there in my kitchen, realizing that my friend was giving me a chance to fight back, giving me the tool I needed to survive this, I felt tears spill down my cheeks for the first time in months. Why would you do that? I managed to ask. That favor was yours. You've been saving it for yourself. Because you're my brother, Bryant said simply. Because you were there when I needed you. Remember sophomore year when my mom was sick and I didn't have money for her medicine? You gave me $200, every cent you had. Didn't ask for it back. Didn't make me feel small for needing help. You just gave it to me and told me family takes care of family. He reached across the table and grabbed my shoulder. Well, family takes care of family. And right now, you need this more than I ever will. So we're going to meet with Khalil next week. We're going to show him everything you have. And we're going to bury your wife and her sugar daddy in court. I didn't know what to say. Didn't have words big enough to express what this meant. So I just nodded and wiped my eyes and let myself believe for the first time in months that maybe I wasn't going to lose everything. Maybe I had a chance after all. The meeting with Khalil Richardson happened the following Tuesday at his office downtown. His office was on the 40th floor of a building on Wacker Drive, all glass and steel, and views of the Chicago River that probably cost more per square foot than my house. The receptionist was intimidatingly beautiful and professional, the kind of person who made you feel underdressed just by existing. She led Bryant and me to a conference room with a table that could seat 20 people and windows that overlooked half the city. And then Khalil walked in. He was 6'3", dark-skinned, bald head, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost what I made in a month. Everything about him radiated power and confidence. This was a man who walked into courtrooms and made judges nervous. This was a man who'd built a reputation on never losing. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Bryant tells me your wife is trying to take you for everything you've worked for. Let's make sure that doesn't happen." We sat down and I walked him through everything. The marriage, the business, the affair, the divorce demands. I showed him the investigators' reports, the photos, the bank statements. He listened without interrupting, making notes on a yellow legal pad, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Here's what I see," he said. "Your wife committed adultery. She used marital funds to facilitate that adultery. New clothes, unexplained expenses, all funded by your joint account or her credit cards that you were paying off. She moved out without notice. She's making demands that are unreasonable given the circumstances. And most importantly, her affair partner is a man with means who is almost certainly funding her legal team, which creates a conflict of interest and potential fraud. Can we use all that? I asked. Absolutely. Illinois may be no fault for grounds of divorce, but it's not blind to inequity in asset distribution. When I get in front of a judge and show that your wife was unfaithful, that she's currently being supported by her affair partner, that she abandoned the marriage and is making demands based on false pretenses about her contributions. He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who just spotted prey. We're not just going to protect your assets. We're going to make her walk away with less than she brought into the marriage. How much is this going to cost me? I had to ask, even though Brian had said it would be free. I needed to hear it from Khalil himself. Bryant called in a favor that I owe him. That favor covers your retainer and the first 100 hours of my time. After that, if this goes longer than expected, we'll talk about payment. But I don't think it will go that long. I think once your wife's lawyer sees what we have, once they realize we're prepared to expose every detail of her affair in open court, they're going to pressure her to settle for far less than she's asking. Maybe even nothing. He stood up and extended his hand again. Your court date is set for 3 weeks from now, correct? Yes, January 12th. Perfect. That gives me time to file motions, gather additional discovery, and prepare to destroy their case. Mr. Webb, you hired me because you wanted the best, so let me be the best. Trust me to handle this. And when we walk into that courtroom in 3 weeks, your wife is going to realize she made the biggest mistake of her life when she underestimated you. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. Khalil's team worked like a machine. They filed motions to freeze marital assets so Simone couldn't empty accounts or run up debt on my credit. They issued subpoenas for Richard Haverford's financial records, claiming he was providing material support that affected the divorce settlement. They demanded depositions from Simone's nonprofit employees to verify her claims about working late nights. Every move was calculated. Every action had purpose. Watching Khalil work was like watching a master chess player who could see 20 moves ahead. Simone's lawyer started pushing back hard, filed counter motions, complained to the judge about harassment, tried to get the affair evidence excluded as irrelevant. But Khalil was ready for every move. He'd argue in briefs that were so thoroughly researched and brilliantly written that even I, with no legal training, could see he was outmaneuvering them at every turn. The momentum was shifting. I could feel it, could see it in the increasingly frantic emails from Simone's attorney trying to negotiate a settlement before court. But Khalil told me not to settle. They're scared, he said during one of our strategy sessions. They know what's coming. They know that when I put those photos on a screen in front of the judge, when I show the timeline of her affair matched up against her claims of sacrifice and support, their entire case falls apart. Let them sweat, let them panic. We're going to court, and we're going to win. 3 days before the hearing, Simone called me directly. First time she'd spoken to me in over a month. Isaiah, please, she said, and I could hear fear in her voice. Real fear. We need to settle this. My lawyer says we should go to mediation, work something out. No, I said simply. We're going to court. We're going to let a judge decide. And when it's over, when you walk away with nothing, I want you to remember that this was your choice. You could have been honest. You could have just left. But you got greedy. You tried to destroy me. And now you're going to pay for it. You hired Khalil Richardson, she said, and it wasn't a question. How? Where did you get that kind of money? Friends, I said. Something you wouldn't understand because you've only ever used people. I have friends who would go to war for me. Do you? Or is Richard Haverford going to drop you the second this gets too messy for him? She hung up without answering. And I smiled for the first time in months. Really smiled. Because I knew I had her. Knew that January 12th was going to be the day everything changed. The day I stopped being the victim and became the man who fought back and won. I didn't know yet just how right I was. January 12th arrived cold and clear, the kind of Chicago winter morning where the sky is so blue it hurts to look at. I stood outside courtroom 4B at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, wearing the best suit I owned. Khalil had told me appearance matters, that judges notice everything, so I gotten a fresh haircut the day before and polished my shoes until they reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. Bryant was beside me, silent support in a world that felt like it was tilting. Keisha had wanted to come, but I'd told her no. Didn't want Devin missing school to watch his uncle's marriage get dissected in public. Through the courtroom doors, I could see Simone already seated at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, Daniel Rosenberg, a man whose silver tongue had apparently won him plenty of cases. She wore that navy dress, the one that said respectable wife wronged by neglectful husband. Her hair was pulled back, minimal makeup, playing the part perfectly. At 8:55, Khalil walked through the courthouse doors like he owned the building. That charcoal suit, that leather briefcase, that presence that made conversations stop and heads turn. I watched Simone see him through the courtroom windows, watched her face go from confused to shocked to terrified in the span of maybe 3 seconds. She grabbed Rosenberg's arm, whispered something urgent. He looked toward the doors, saw Khalil approaching, left, and I swear the color drained from his face too. They knew. Everyone in Chicago's legal community knew. When Khalil Richardson took a case, someone was about to get destroyed. And today, that someone was my wife. Ready? Khalil asked me, his hand on my shoulder. His voice was calm, almost casual, like we were going to lunch instead of war. Remember what we talked about. Let me do the talking. Stay calm no matter what they say, and trust me. I nodded. Couldn't speak. My throat was too tight with a mixture of fear and anticipation and rage that had been building for 4 months. We walked into that courtroom, and I felt every eye follow us. Felt Simone's stare burning into me as Khalil set his briefcase down with a deliberate thud that echoed in the silent room. He shook Rosenberg's hand, professional courtesy between enemies, and I saw the other lawyer's hand trembling slightly. Good. Let them be scared. Let them understand what they were up against. Judge Patricia Monroe entered at exactly 9 a.m., a black woman in her early 60s with gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen every lie the legal system could produce. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked between both tables. We're here for Webb versus Webb, dissolution of marriage. I've reviewed both filings, and I have to say, this is one of the more contentious cases I've seen in a while. Mrs. Webb is requesting significant assets, and Mr. Webb is contesting nearly everything. Mr. Rosenberg, you may begin. Rosenberg stood, buttoned his jacket, and launched into his opening statement. Simone had sacrificed her career as a nurse to support my business growth, had provided emotional labor and household management that allowed me to focus on building wealth, had been neglected and taken for granted while I worked 80-hour weeks, deserved compensation for her contributions and her suffering. It was a good speech, well practiced, almost believable if you didn't know the truth. Then Khalil stood up, and the temperature in that courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Your Honor, Khalil began, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as razors. Opposing counsel has painted a picture of a devoted wife abandoned by her ambitious husband. It's a compelling story. It's also a complete fabrication. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a bound document that looked to be 50 pages thick. What we actually have is a case of calculated adultery, systematic deception, and attempted fraud. Mrs. Webb didn't sacrifice her career. She quit her job voluntarily in 2014 and used marital funds to start a nonprofit that employed 2 people and achieved minimal impact. She didn't provide support for Mr. Webb's business growth. She actively undermined it by conducting a lengthy affair that drained marital resources and divided her attention and loyalty. Rosenberg jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state. The alleged affair is irrelevant to asset distribution. It's entirely relevant, Khalil cut him off, when that affair involved using marital assets to fund the relationship, when the affair partner is now supporting Mrs. Webb financially and likely funding her legal representation, and when the timeline of the affair coincides exactly with her decision to file for divorce. This isn't about fault, Your Honor. This is about equity, and there's nothing equitable about rewarding someone for betrayal. Judge Monroe leaned forward, interested now. Mr. Richardson, you're saying you have evidence of this affair and its financial impact? I have overwhelming evidence, Your Honor. Photographs, private investigator reports, Bank statements showing unexplained expenditures, testimony from hotel staff, and cell phone records. I also have evidence that Mrs. Webb is currently living in a $4,200 per month apartment in River North that she cannot possibly afford on her nonprofit director salary. Someone is paying for that apartment. Someone is funding her lifestyle, and I can prove who that someone is. Simone leaned over and whispered frantically to Rosenberg. I could see panic in her eyes now, could see her realizing that I hadn't just shown up to lose quietly. Rosenberg stood again. Your Honor, we're prepared to withdraw some of our requests in the interest of settling this matter quickly. I'm not interested in a settlement, Khalil said flatly. My client has been patient, has been accommodating, has tried to resolve this privately. Mrs. Webb responded by increasing her demands and mocking him for not having legal representation. Well, he has representation now, and we're here to get justice. Judge Monroe looked at me for the first time, really looked at me, and I saw something like sympathy in her eyes. Mr. Webb, is it true you attempted to negotiate with your wife's counsel before today? Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. Multiple times. I offered reasonable settlements. She rejected all of them and told me I was going to lose everything. Told me I should just give her what she wanted and save myself the embarrassment. And yet here you are. The judge almost smiled. Mr. Richardson, present your evidence. What happened over the next 2 hours was surgical. Khalil put the investigators' photos on a screen so large that everyone in the courtroom could see them in crystal clarity. Simone and Richard Haverford entering the Peninsula Hotel. Simone and Richard kissing outside the parking garage. Simone and Richard having dinner at expensive restaurants in neighborhoods 40 minutes from our house. Time-stamped, dated, undeniable. I watched Simone's face as her secret life got displayed for the court, for the record, for everyone. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation, of being caught, of watching her carefully constructed narrative collapse into rubble. Khalil called his first witness, the private investigator, Vincent Cho. Vincent walked through his surveillance, confirmed every detail, provided context for each photo, confirmed that he'd observed them together 17 times over a 2-month period, confirmed that Richard Haverford was a venture capitalist worth approximately $47 million, confirmed that Mrs. Webb's current apartment lease was in her name, but the payments came from an LLC registered to Haverford Investments. Rosenberg tried to object, tried to discredit, tried everything he could to stop the bleeding. But Khalil had done his homework. Every piece of evidence was admissible, every witness was credible, every argument was airtight. When Vincent stepped down, Rosenberg looked like a man who just watched his career take a hit it might not recover from. Then Khalil did something I wasn't expecting. He called Richard Haverford himself to the stand. The man actually showed up, walked into that courtroom in a suit that probably cost $5,000, took the oath, sat down with the confidence of someone who'd never been held accountable for anything in his life. Khalil didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Haverford, are you currently in a romantic relationship with Simone Webb? I declined to answer on the grounds. Let me rephrase. Are you currently paying for Mrs. Webb's apartment in River North? Khalil slid a bank statement across to the judge. Because these records show monthly payments of $4,200 from Haverford Investments LLC to Luxury Living Properties, the management company for Mrs. Webb's building. The lease started in November, same month she filed for divorce. Richard's jaw tightened. I provide temporary housing assistance to several individuals through my charitable foundation. This isn't your charitable foundation. This is your personal investment LLC, the same LLC you used to book hotel rooms at the Peninsula, the same LLC that paid for dinners, gifts, and a weekend trip to Miami in September. Khalil produced more records. You've spent approximately $43,000 on Mrs. Webb since July, while she was still married, while she was living in my client's house, while she was planning to take half of everything he owns. The judge's expression had gone from interested to furious. Mr. Haverford, are you also funding Mrs. Webb's legal representation in this divorce? Richard glanced at his own lawyer, who'd accompanied him and now looked like he wanted to disappear. I may have provided some financial assistance. Yes or no, Mr. Haverford? Yes, I've provided financial assistance. Judge Monroe closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, her gaze landed on Simone like a hammer. Mrs. Webb, stand up! Simone stood shakily, mascara running down her cheeks. You came into my courtroom asking for half of a business you didn't build, a house you abandoned, and alimony for being a devoted wife. You failed to disclose that you've been conducting an affair, that your affair partner is supporting you financially, and that he's funding your legal team. Do you understand how fraud works, Mrs. Webb? Your Honor, Simone's voice broke. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I don't care what you meant. I care what you did, and what you did was waste this court's time with false claims while attempting to financially destroy your husband. The judge turned to Rosenberg. Does your client wish to withdraw her petition and negotiate a reasonable settlement, or should I make my ruling based on what I've seen today? Rosenberg looked at Simone, looked at the evidence still displayed on the screen, looked at Khalil's satisfied expression. We'd like to request a recess to discuss options with our client, Your Honor. You have 30 minutes. Use them wisely. They came back 45 minutes later with a settlement offer that made me want to laugh out loud. Simone would take her personal possessions and her car. She'd withdraw all claims to the house, the business, savings, and alimony. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue legal action against her or Richard Haverford for fraud or pursue criminal charges related to misuse of marital funds. She'd sign a non-disclosure agreement promising not to speak publicly about the marriage or divorce. Clean break. No drama. Both parties walk away. What does your client think? Judge Monroe asked Khalil. Khalil looked at me. We discussed this possibility. He told me I could push for more, could demand she pay my legal fees, could pursue damages. But I was tired. So tired of fighting, of anger, of carrying the weight of her betrayal. I just wanted it over. Wanted her out of my life completely and permanently. I accept, I said, on one condition. She signs the papers today, right now, and I never have to see her again. Judge Monroe nodded. Mrs. Webb, do you accept these terms? Simone nodded, unable to speak, unable to look at me. She signed the papers at the defendant's table with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. Her lawyer signed. Khalil signed. I signed. And just like that, 8 years of marriage ended with ink and paper and the bitter taste of victory that didn't feel quite like I'd imagined. As people filed out of the courtroom, I finally looked at Simone directly, really looked at her. This woman I'd loved, who I'd built a life with, who I'd trusted with everything. Was any of it real? I asked quietly. When we met at the hospital, when I proposed, when we got married, was any of it real, or was I just useful until something better came along? She met my eyes, and for just a second, I saw the woman I'd married, the woman who'd sat with me in that waiting room, the woman who'd said yes on Navy Pier. It was real at the beginning, she said softly. But people change, Isaiah. I changed. You changed. And I'm sorry it ended like this. I'm sorry I hurt you, but I'm not sorry I chose myself. Chose herself. That's how she saw it. Not as betrayal or cruelty or greed, as choosing herself. And maybe that was the final lesson she had to teach me, that some people will always prioritize themselves no matter who they destroy in the process. That love and loyalty and promises were just words to people like her. Pretty words that meant nothing when convenience was more appealing. I walked out of that courthouse with Khalil and Bryant into the January cold that felt cleaner somehow. Sharp and honest, real. Thank you, I said to both of them, for believing in me, for fighting for me, for not letting me give up. That's what family does, Bryant said, the same words he'd used in my kitchen. We fight for each other. Khalil shook my hand. Mr. Webb, you're free now. Your business is yours. Your house is yours. Your future is yours. Don't waste it looking back at what you lost. Focus on what you're going to build next. I watched Simone and Richard drive away together, her in the passenger seat of his Mercedes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours to carry in the first place. 2 years have passed since that morning in Judge Monroe's courtroom, and I barely recognize the man I used to be. My company is thriving. We just finished a $12 million project building affordable housing in Bronzeville, exactly the kind of work I'd always dreamed of doing. I hired 10 more employees, including 3 women in leadership roles, because I learned something from Simone. When you only surround yourself with people who look and think like you miss things. Important things. I date occasionally, but nothing serious. I'm learning that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, that I can be whole without someone else completing me. Devin graduated high school last year, got accepted to Howard University on a partial scholarship, and I helped cover the rest. He calls me every Sunday, tells me about his classes and his friends, and this girl he's dating who studies engineering. He calls me Dad now, not Uncle, not Isaiah, just Dad. And every time he does, something in my chest warms in a way I can't quite explain. Keisha says I've softened, that losing Simone made me more open somehow, more willing to be vulnerable. Maybe she's right. Maybe having everything taken from you teaches you that possessions don't matter as much as we think, that what matters is who shows up when you're at your lowest. I never heard from Simone again after that day in court, but I heard about her through mutual acquaintances who still felt the need to update me. Richard Haverford dropped her 6 months after the divorce was finalized, found someone younger, richer, more connected. Simone had to move out of that fancy apartment, had to downsize her life significantly. The nonprofit closed due to lack of funding. Last I heard, she'd moved back to Memphis, back to where she started, working as a nurse again at the same hospital where her grandmother used to take her as a child. Full circle. I don't feel satisfaction hearing that. Don't feel vindication. Just sadness for who she could have been if she'd been honest. If she just told me she wasn't happy, instead of lying and cheating and trying to destroy me on her way out. But that's her journey, her lesson to learn. Mine was different. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever felt like the world was ending and you wouldn't survive it, I need you to hear this. You will survive. You're stronger than you think. And sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you becomes the catalyst for becoming who you were always meant to be. I didn't know I could stand up for myself the way I did in that courtroom. Didn't know I had friends loyal enough to go to war for me. Didn't know I could lose everything I thought mattered and discover it didn't matter as much as I believed. That was the day I realized peace don't come cheap. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to walk through fire to get to the other side. But when you come out, when you finally breathe clean air again, you understand something essential about yourself. You understand that you're not defined by who stays. You're defined by how you stand up after they leave. My name is Isaiah Garrett Webb. I'm 45 years old. I live on the south side of Chicago in a house I own free and clear, running a business that employs 43 people and changes lives. I was married once to a woman who tried to destroy me. She failed. And in her failure, she gave me the greatest gift she ever could have. She set me free. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Subscribe if you believe in second chances and survival and the power of standing up when the world tries to knock you down. And remember, the person who underestimates you is giving you the greatest tactical advantage you'll ever have. Let them doubt you. Let them laugh. Let them think they've won. Then show them what you're really made of. That smile on Simone's face when she thought I had no lawyer? I think about it sometimes. Think about how confidence can turn to terror in seconds when you realize you misjudged someone. When you realize the person you thought was beaten is actually just getting started. She laughed because she thought I was defeated. The judge didn't laugh. The judge saw the truth. And truth, in the end, is the only thing that matters.